Here, here. All right, thank you. Since I'm starting, I'd like to give you... look at this. They've put the slides up already. I don't even have to ask. Fantastic. Brexit is very simple. And I'm something of an amateur historian. I got into history because I wanted to know where the liberty came from. And this is what I think is most important about Brexit. Just these words I've thrown up here. Some people have tried to sell it's about immigration, it's about xenophobia, it's about racism, all that stuff. We hear it here in the US as well. Brexit is about basic justice. It's about self-determination, right? It's maybe the biggest act of British self-determination since 1776, which, correctly understood, was an act of a great British act of self-determination. In the case of Brexit, it's simply this. People that Brits can't vote out shouldn't make British laws. That's why there was a majority for Brexit. And I've got to say, in the run-up to the vote, I was, as a Liberty guy, I was interested to see how it was going to go. Nobody actually expected the Brits to vote out. The media told us we were going to stay in. Never believe the media when it comes to elections. We've learned that. But I was interested because the liberty that we enjoy even here in the United States, and I can say we because, as it was said, I am now an American, it was kind of developed on the islands of my birth, the British Isles. And so I was wondering, well, if you build this massive social democratic welfarist state, which the Brits have built since the Second World War, and so pretty much everybody who is alive can only remember that way of solving problems, is there enough residual cultural love of liberty, right, that it defeats the living memory of the state handles everything? And I thought, if the referendum goes for Brexit, then it would tell us that thing in our nature, right, as Anglos, right, where classical liberalism, as I say, largely, not entirely, but largely comes from, is still so strong that it overwhelms this saturation in social democratic welfarism, which is all I remember, right, growing up in Britain. And it turns out that 75 years of the latter, of welfarism, doesn't completely eliminate people's love of liberty and basic political justice. And so we voted for self-determination. The political class has no right to give away power that is only delegated to them. That is also why Brexit was voted for. That the giving away of power, actually by King John, in the early 13th century was why Magna Carta happened. It was the same problem, and it created a same uprising, kind of a flick back for liberty in response. You'll hear on the media that all these xenophobes voted for Brexit. They didn't like immigration, and that's what it was all about. No, it wasn't about immigration. It was about, symptomatically, if we can't make our own laws, then we can't control our immigration. That was a symptom, not a cause. And this is an instance of something that I think we see throughout Anglo history, of when we get to very simple binary choices for or against liberty, democracy serves liberty, usually. Now, I know that's an unfashionable thing to say in a big conference full of libertarians, because, we're a constitutional republic, not a democracy. That is true. Mob rule is dangerous. That is why we have individual rights, why we have our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But most times, whether it's Magna Carta, whether it's the Glorious Revolution, democracy serves liberty when the choice is that clear as it was for the Brexit vote. And I just want to show you, this was what the government sent to everybody before the Brexit vote. And I would like to draw your attention to, this is your decision. The government will implement what you decide. There it is in black and white. A once-in-a-generation decision. Every house paid for with taxpayers' money, bit of propaganda there, paid for by taxpayers' money, but that is what we voted on. And there is the ballot paper. It's very simple. It says nothing whatsoever about a deal or any qualifications. The choice was remain a member of the European or leave the European Union. That is the choice the British have made. Now, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the calls for a second referendum and where Britain is now. The problem that Britain is facing is that there is a majority in Parliament against the will of the people. Theresa May, our former Prime Minister, soon to be former Prime Minister, I would say colluded with Parliament to ensure that the will of the people would be defeated. There was an extraordinary vote, unprecedented, where Parliament criminalized the implementation of the referendum decision on April the 7th, I think it was. We actually passed a law that reversed the law to honor the will of the people. An extraordinary thing. And as it was mentioned, we've got a new Prime Minister coming. Let's see if he's got the backbone to not let that happen. You can go on YouTube. You can find dozens, scores, probably hundreds of clips of people who are now asking for a rerun, who are all Remainers, all on the losing side, saying that this would be once in a generation, and if we're out, we're out. And that meant out of, the European Court of Justice jurisdiction, the single market, et cetera, the customs union. If Britain now doesn't deliver Brexit, I believe it will be the greatest knowing reversal of a trend that has gone on from, I would say, the 11th century on the islands of Britain, the British Isles, that trend towards increased liberty and democracy. It's not a straight line, but never in our history, in British history, have the British people consented to clearly and explicitly reverse it, to actually go backwards on that curve. If Brexit isn't delivered, that's what we would be doing. I think, because the Brits are getting really angry now, angry enough that they voted for Brexit in the first place, by the way, that they won't let it happen. If they do, well, then I will not be British anymore. With that, I'll end. Thanks.
Let's start off again with Robin. You've heard the other comments. Do you have anything you would like to add or disagree with of your fellow panelists? And we'll go down the line here. Robin?
Oh, well, obviously I agree with everything that we've heard from the stage, thankfully. I also think that, at its moral root, the analogy, the American analogy, I hate to say it, but it's the end of slavery. That was it was the economic argument then too, right? And I think at the end of the day, the Remainers who want to rerun this and say, well, the Brits don't know what they voted for, they've got more information now, there's going to be this and there's going to be that, are completely missing the point that when you're dealing with such a basic thing as self-determination, all the things that Brennan talked about too, you get it right, and then you deal with the consequences, right? I mean, I almost feel like any economic discussion is beside the point because we're dealing with such basic morality here, and I think that's it's the tin ear on the other side. Even after 3 years, it's extremely we shouldn't be surprised, but superficially, it's shocking. And I think the more they exhibit that tin ear, what you're seeing is a hardening of the Leave vote. It's like, oh, you're going to double down on the condescension. You're going to double down on missing the point. You're going to double down on the elitism. I wanted to see civil disobedience in the UK before there was that little march from Sheffield down to London. I was 3 or 4 months ahead of that going, what, have we lost it? The Brits, what's happened to the British? But, we got there in the end. And the Brexit Party's success at the European elections, as Brennan was saying, this has shown some truths about British politics and reorganized it in ways that aren't reversible.
Don't share the same language, don't share the same currency, don't share the same religion. I mean, these are basic principles.
And I think with respect to the European problem, the common law, the idea of common law from the people up, is fundamentally different from the
Roman
continent,
law,
where it's law from the
tradition.
top down. That is an absolutely fundamental break in political culture. And when we, the British, are acting out of that place, all the Europeans see, I think, is bolshiness, right? Oh, them again, right? Being different and exceptional. Well, we've been at it for 1,000 years and it's working for us fine. And so, I think that's important. It's different traditions, different political traditions, profoundly.
Thank you. with the whole idea of Brexit and we're having possibly Boris Johnson being elected, how will that be different in terms of having Parliament controlled in a way that will favor Brexit and a hard Brexit versus the Parliament group that will do the same thing to Boris Johnson that they did to May, where you keep delay, so eventually there is no Brexit.
So this is what I mean when I say there's a civil war atmosphere. There is a profound conflict taking place between the political class and the people, and it's going to be very hard to resolve. I think the only resolution now is hard Brexit. We walk away. See you later, European Union. We don't want anything to do with you. And that's the end of it. Anything else, hard Brexit is not even a real phrase. Hard Brexit and soft Brexit are phrases that were made up after the referendum by people who just wanted to start confusing what Brexit was all about. There is just Brexit, and that means not being a member of the European Union or any of its institutions. It's so simple, it's almost hilarious. We have to leave the European Union by walking away with no deal.
I agree with that, and to your question, that is the question, and I don't think anybody actually knows the answer, because we don't know who Boris Johnson is that fundamentally, and we also don't know, because we're at the margins of the British Constitution now, right? So there's shenanigans to stop it, and I think something significant happened today, and I haven't got online, so I don't know exactly what it is, and there will be shenanigans to stop it, and there may have to be shenanigans, if Boris is true and sincere, to stop the people who want to stop it. And we are in uncharted territory. But also where you were going with that question is, if it carries on in that way, delay, it doesn't happen. It might be delay, and then the riots that we both think are, I think, overdue.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're not going to riot for this, what the hell are we going to riot for? There were people, when Maggie Thatcher brought in the poll tax, which was a badly conceived tax, right? Brits, I remember it as a kid or a teenager, whatever I was. The riots in London, people smashed a few things, and the tax that was the end of it. Now, this was just a small relative to saving democracy, because it's democracy now, it's not Brexit. It's saving a 1,000-year tradition. It's bigger than Brexit, right? The Brexit vote was part of the tradition, but now we're explicitly saving that tradition. So if we don't go hit the streets...
And this is actually the sad thing about it, which I mentioned, that your old parliamentary tradition destroyed actually the vox populi. And
yes.
That was the bad thing about it, because if you had done it right away, it would have been history and done. And you just played the same game as the European Union.
You may have noticed there seems to be a lot of foggy thinking at the upper echelons of the British government. However, the British have not lost their ability to think clearly, and we have two examples right here. And I was just thinking, if these gentlemen were in charge rather than the crowd is there, what a far better world. Guys, thank you so much. Barbara, thank you, as always. And the next program will begin in 10 minutes.
Thank you.